Masking fluid is latex suspended in ammonia. It is used on dry paper to reserve whites, or you can paint it on paper has paint on it, and it'll reserve those pale colors. You don't want to shake or stir the bottle. It'll encourage the clotting in the bottle. You want to store the bottles upside down. That puts the air at the bottom of the bottle, and any clotting that tends to occur there when you right the bottle up to pour some out. It has better masking fluid available to you. There is a permanent masking fluid that will not come off your paper. It is sold right next to regular masking fluid, so make sure you get the correct kind. I'm not sure what you use permanent for because I want my whites to come back and not be covered up by the masking fluid. My favorite kind of masking fluid is Pebeo. It just seems to have a better consistency and flow really well. And it already has a coloring on it so that you can see where you're painting it on white paper. Most watercolor brands have their own brand of masking fluid. This Winsor Newton is white and it's hard to see. So I will add just a little bit of non-staining color to it so that I can see where it's at. I tend to decant the masking fluid onto a clean section of my palette and add the watercolor on that. And I don't add additional color or water to inside my bottles. If the masking fluid's a little thick, you can add up to 30% water to it to thin it down. That helps more with drying time. If you've got a really thick layer of masking fluid, it just takes longer to dry. It doesn't cause any problems in terms of application. You just use more masking fluid and it dries longer. It dries longer. One of the things you can do is you can use a hair dryer to dry the masking fluid and help it, you get back to painting quicker. So that's one of the things you're going to want to do. You're going to want to use an inexpensive brush because eventually the brush starts to clot and lose its nice tip that you want to brush to apply masking fluid with. If you will frequently clean it out in the process of applying the masking fluid, that will keep it from clotting onto the brushes quickly. You don't want to leave masking fluid on your paper for a long period of time. That can encourage it to be hard to remove, and I have had that happen to a painting. Anytime you use some process with watercolor, you run the chance of it having some problems. But it is an amazing tool. The paper has to be totally dry before you apply the masking fluids so that it does not go into the fibers. I want to talk about the other masking pens too. And you want your paper, the masking fluid to be totally dry before you start applying the paint. And then once the paint is on there, you let the paint be totally dry before you remove the masking fluid by rubbing it. This will keep it from making problems for you. There is some special applicators that happen. This mask pen has a tip that delivers the paint in a thin line, and it's got a little plunger here that cleans it out. You can take the cap off and rinse it out to keep it from clogging as quickly as it can sometimes. The fine line I'm not as fond of the masking fluid, but it does a great job with its applicator tip. One of the disadvantages, and when you're using these bottles, if you hold them from the sides, it tends not to squirt masking fluid out. You can actually squeeze a little bit and it won't let anything out until you just gradually let it go. And then it lets you put a layer of masking fluid down in a really thin line that moves along. You can actually go across paint. You actually can paint with it so it can make shapes. The one thing that is a little bit annoying is you've got to get that tip cleaned, and so you're going to have to put this little plunger into that little opening, and I got to get my bifocals so I can see that little sucker, and eventually it will go in. he said with confidence that belied his accuracy. There we go. Mission accomplished. And I have a little cup that I store these upside down in, and that allows them to last a lot longer. One of the things that, and there is a separate thing you can buy on Amazon. It's called a precision tip applicator bottle. It doesn't have a plunger. You can get somewhere between 8 and 12 of these for a very low amount of money, $12 or $14, something like that. So if they do clog, you can replace them. I will put some masking fluid in these bottles and add a little bit of water to it in the bottles. These bottles, I keep the thick masking fluid in my screw-on tops, and then this is where I may have already thinned it down with a little bit of water. It's got a little protection thing to keep it from coming out. They're a handy thing that I've tried, and they seem to work just fine. One of the things you can use to apply your masking fluid also is sticks or toothpicks. And one of the tools that I use a lot is the Incredible Nib. It's got a wedge and it's kind of a hard surface, and what you do is you wet it, and you're going to take the masking, what happens with masking fluid, that water that you paint right up against the side of the masking fluid, it piles up and it can make hard edges. So it's one of the disadvantages, it's one of the things watercolor does really easily, and it's one of the disadvantages to masking fluid is you get those hard edges. You can see right here on this piece of paper, I've got a hard edge. If I wet my Incredible Nib and shake off the excess water, I can come up to that hard edge, rub it just a little bit, and lift back that excess pigment, and it gets rid of a hard edge. So this is, just like it sounds, the Incredible Nib. Where is it at? There you go, NIB. It can help you soften hard edges. One of the things, this is how I used masking fluid. I used it to retain the whites of this flannel shirt. And I just drew all these lines, and everywhere I drew the lines with the masking fluid, it kept the whites of the flannel shirt. The other thing it did, it became a channel. So when I ran my brush along this line of squares right here, I didn't have to work so hard at getting a whole lot of squares. The watercolor just filled up that little place where the masking fluid was not, and it helped me paint this. After this shirt dried, I removed the masking fluid, and then I darkened areas to round Johnny's shirt around his shoulder back over here, to make the arm feel that there were lights and darks on the paints that became the sleeves, the distant shirt, the shirt that's in the shadow, and the part that runs back. In this painting, I used it to reserve the whites of my tree trunks. So when I wanted to paint all this juicy paint and make it feel continuous, I put some masking fluid where the trees needed to be reserved, and then I could paint across this surface freely, and it feels continuous when it's behind the trees, and then when the trees appear from it, these wet, juicy colors were able to be applied, and you reserved and held your tree trunks in place. This was done in a kind of the opposite way. In the space between the tree trunks, I painted in my masking fluid to reserve the distant sky that was pale. And then I could paint over the top of this very wet and juicy, and get these continuous feeling colors that let you see through the trees to the distant pales. In Washington, D.C. is the court of Poseidon. It has statues in a fountain, and so this is one of the titans that's in that fountain. It had water falling across the top of it, and I painted a very gestural and fun gleams of water running down the body and running and falling in front and around the statue. I'm currently working on a piece where I'm painting fireworks. And one of the things I did is I enlarged the fireworks so I could see the weird little shapes and colors, and the places where they were dots and the places where they peeked out, and that gave me a pattern to how to build my painting. It's a lot of dark, so I painted down masking fluid in a way so I could see where this spout of fireworks come out. And then one of the things I did is sometimes it would come out a little too thick or too continuous, and I would take just this piece of metal that had a little sharp edge, and I would just come in here and scratch as I was applying that liquid while it was still liquid, and make some gaps and places where it picked out and made these gestural kind of applications of paint that are going to talk about fireworks. One thing I was going to show you, this is out further than my painting, so I can take my finger and rub it on the masking fluid and see where it leaves my lights. I can take this tool here and I can just rub it on top of this, and it will extend it and it will lift it off. It makes little boogers that you can pick off of this, but you can see where that white is starting to gleam from masking fluid. So it is a very valuable tool. It does things, it reserves whites that you can't get by painting around all that multitude of little tiny dots that you see in there. You couldn't paint around that and leave your pales. This is uncoated paper, and I'm going to have to leave a lot of whites because that gleam that comes off of a glossy paper, that gleam that comes from the fireworks being light emitted, is going to be lost if I don't have brightness. In watercolor on this uncoated paper, your colors sink in, they become less vibrant, so you have to pretend to talk about the brightness and exaggerate it. I hope this is helpful for you to learn more about masking fluid and the good tool it is.